Hello, everyone. I think we can start. Thank you for coming to the final Atlas lecture for 2024. I will give a brief and probably not necessary introduction to our speaker today. Florence Gaignerot-Driessen did her MA at the University of Paris-Sorbonne, from where she also received her PhD in Greek archaeology on a Cretan subject, from post-palatial occupation to the Greek city-state, the case of Mirabello, which was published in 2016 as a monograph in the Guillaume series. She co-authored a volume on the birth of the Cretan cities, co-authored several volumes of publication of the excavations at Sisi, has published around 60 articles in peer-reviewed journals and proceedings of international conferences on late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, Crete, and the Eastern Mediterranean, notably on polis formation, Aegean religion, and Homeric studies. She has been teaching and has held research positions in France, Belgium, Italy, and Germany. Since August 2022, she is elected assistant professor at the Department of Classics at the University of Cincinnati. Florence has excavated on Crete, Malia, Itanos, Eleftherna, Palekastro, Sisi, Dridros, and Cyprus, Pylako-Kinokramus, and she's currently the director of the Anavlochos project, under the auspices of the French school. So without further delay, I will give the floor to our speaker to present us a sacred landscape through micro-mapping of a votive deposit at Anavlochos. Thank you, Florence.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω θέρμα την Τίνα που μας προσκάλεσε για να σας πω λίγο για τον Ανάβλοχο. So, it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you very much, Tina, for inviting me to take part in this Atlas seminar and to give me the chance to present some part of the ongoing Anavlochos project, which is an archaeological project investigating the Anavlochos mountain in eastern Crete. So tonight I will concentrate more particularly on the sacred landscape of Anavlochos and show you some of the ways we are currently trying to approach this landscape, notably by using cartographic and GIS-based methodologies as well as 3D visualizations technology. So not only actually the micro mapping of a votive deposit that is mentioned in the subtitle, which is a bit misleading or outdated. Anyway. So, and this is the reason why I am also presenting tonight on behalf of my collaborators. So Brieuc Guillaume, who is there in the audience, yeah, okay, he's here. The team topographer and the topographer at the French School at Athens, under the auspices of which the Anavlochos project is run. But also Sabine, Sorin, our 3D imagery specialists, both in the lab and in the field, and Séverine Sanz-Laliberté, who is currently building a 3D GIS of one of the votive deposits we excavated at Anavlochos. So Sabine and Séverine are both design engineers at the CNRS laboratory Archéorient, to which I remained affiliated when I accepted a position at Cincinnati in the Department of Classics. The notion of religious landscape, John Chade and François de Polignac explain, arose from the observation that worship and rites exist only insofar as they are anchored in space, either stably or temporarily. So tonight I would like to consider the case of Anavlochos and the construction and reconstruction of its sacred landscape following a long-term and socio-political perspective. Recent excavations on this massif of eastern Crete have uncovered separate cult sites that provide an opportunity to review the way in which a sacred landscape was formed and transformed between the late Bronze Age and the Classical period, to reconsider the location, form, and function of the sacred landscape of the sacred places that mark this landscape out, and to reassess more specifically their importance for the social and political organization of the communities that visited and used them. So in other words, I'd like to give you tonight a preliminary presentation of the cult places and material that we recently recovered from Anavlochos, and consider the construction of its sacred landscape in the historical process of the emergence and crystallization of the Greek cities. And in the frame of the Atlas seminar, I also would like to illustrate the methods and techniques we use to reconstruct and study this ancient sacred landscape. So first, I'll give you an overview of the site and the project, and then I will present our preliminary results and ongoing research at the cult places of Anavlochos, that is votive deposit 1 and 2, and the sanctuary of Kakoplai that you see on the topographical map. Anavlochos is a 5-kilometer long mountainous ridge overlooking the village of Vrachasi and the Mirabello Valley, which leads from central Crete to the Mirabello Bay and eastern Crete. It is located midway between the coastal settlement of Sisi and Malia to the west, that were both abandoned at the end of the Late Bronze Age, precisely when Anavlochos started to be settled, and the urban centers of the Greek cities of Brieuc and Miletos to the east that developed in the Archaic period, precisely when the settlement and necropolis of Anavlochos were deserted, whereas its cult places, the sanctuary of Kakoplai and Deposit 1, remained visited until the classical period. In brief, both geographically and historically, Anavlochos represents a transition from the palaces of the Late Bronze Age to the Greek city-states of the Archaic period. The place was visited by early travelers from the end of the 19th century, but the first excavations were conducted by Pierre de Margne on behalf of the French court of Athens during a blitz campaign of 5 days in August 1929. So de Margne explored some megalithic terraces in the settlement located in the upper part of the central valley, and excavated some ruined and looted tombs in the contemporary necropolis extending at the foot of the lower slopes to the north. But on the steep slope of Kakoplai, literally the bad side, he also opened some trenches which yielded a rich deposit of terracottas, mixed with a few fragments of pithoi and ceramics. It seemed to him that these finds must have come from, I quote, some small sanctuary established higher up towards the summit, of which the wrens have left nothing. As, and I quote again, the mountainous nature of the area did not seem to promise any important discoveries, end of quote, de Margne did not pursue his research at Anavlochos. Between 2005 and 2014, following clandestine diggings, several rescue excavations, and some of which I was fortunate to take part, were carried out by the effort of La City in the necropolis, in the settlement of the Central Valley, and on the peak of Vigla at the eastern end of the massif, demonstrating further the need for a systematic research program at Anavlochos. Consequently, we conducted a pedestrian survey of the entire massif on behalf of the French court of Athens, and this allowed us to locate the remains reported by de Margne, but also to identify new remains, including the 2 votive deposits on the summit and the cult building at Kakoplai, and also to specify the extent, nature, and chronology of occupation. Based on the result of this first investigation, it was clear that given the scale and nature of the archaeological remains, but also the chronology of its occupation and its micro-regional setting, Anavlochos represented an exceptional case study to explore the formative period of transition leading from palaces to polis. And this is the reason why we initiated in 2017 a research program including systematic excavations on the massif, the Anavlochos project. The objective of the Anavlochos project is to reconstruct the economic, social, and political organization of a community established on a Cretan mountain at the down of the Greek cities by exploring at the same time the remains of its agro-pastoral, industrial, residential, funerary, and religious activities. More specifically, the project seeks to examine the formation and transformation of the social groups established in Anavlochos in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, and early Archaic period. Another goal is to evaluate the degree of centralization of the political authority ruling the community by looking for potential communal spaces or buildings and practices. In this perspective, the evolution of cult places and practices notably represent an important field of study. The preliminary results, if you're interested, have been presented annually in detailed reports, initially in the BCH, the Bulletin de Correspondance Hellénique, and more recently in the Bulletin archéologique des écoles françaises à l'étranger, the open access online journal of the French schools abroad, which since 2020 has replaced the report issue of the BCH. So if you're looking for, reports for French excavations, you now have to go to the BAF and not the BCH. More detailed studies have also been presented in journals and conference proceedings. And if you want a complete bibliography, you can consult online the website of the project. Between 2017 and 2022, 5 systematic excavation campaigns were carried out in the early Iron Age settlement of the Central Valley, where 2 separate districts were excavated, and in the contemporary necropolis, where a series of monumental burial mounds, tumuli, unprecedented in Cretan archaeological records, were discovered. But more interestingly for us tonight, the excavations also brought to light several cult places in locations not reported by demand but identified during the survey. So the 2 large deposits, 1 and 2, 2 large deposits of votive terracottas on top of the mountain, and a cult building equipped with a bench on the slope of Kakoplai above the trenches opened by demand. So it is this sanctuary is located halfway between the necropolis and the settlement. Then you see here on this image the location of the different cult places I've just mentioned. So what I would like to consider with you now are precisely these cult places, the deposits and the sanctuary of Kakoplai, and also our efforts to reconstruct and analyze them together with the material they yielded within the sacred landscape of Anavlochos. And we're starting with votive deposit 2, which is located in the western part of the summit, in the highest scraps of the vertical cliff that falls immediately south of a small rocky peak. It was identified during the survey in 2016 and excavated in 2017. And you see that the material was recovered from 3 natural rock cavities. And on this image produced by Brieuc and Sabine, you see part of the fragments of figurines that were recovered, materialized by colored dots, with in each cavity 1 color being used for the fragments belonging to a same object. The material from deposit 2 consists of more than 150 fragments of zoomorphic solid figurines and well-made hollow statuettes. They mostly represent bodies, but the assemblage, which is now under study by Valiat Crete, also contains an equid figurine and 2 bird figurines. The abdomen of one of the birds is perforated, and the foot of the other consists of a hollow cylinder, suggesting that both were attached to a support. Several statuettes are also associated, as you can see here, with fragments of plaques, most likely designed to stabilize them. So my guess is that the terracottas were initially displayed in the natural cavities of the bedrock and accidentally broke in situ over time, with the fragments falling lower on the slope. We expected to find body fragments associated with this wheel-nailed bull's head, but thanks to the dedicated work of our conservator, Pipi Saridaki, it turned out that it was originally inserted in the saddle between two decorated holes of consecration. Sabine virtually reconstructed the complete object by 3D scanning the elements that had been recovered and mended, completing the tip of the hole, copying and flipping the left part to reconstruct the right one, and finally reinserting the head in the saddle between the holes of consecration, where the attachment area was clearly identifiable. While holes of consecrations and bulls are well attested in Minoan religious iconography, the combination illustrated by this model is unseen in earlier Minoan iconography and actually not easily readable, as if the cult nature of these features had been clearly understood, but their precise meaning had been lost. Fragments of several smaller models of horns of consecration with cylindrical tubes in between were also recovered from Deposit 2. They find clear and well-known parallels at Ayat Rigada and in the Patsos cave, which gives us a quite secure LM3C date for Deposit 2. So, in this video made by Sabine, we approach the cliff of Deposit 2, which Brieuc modeled last summer, and in which you'll see Sabine has tentatively placed, 2 days ago actually, the 3D models of some of the terracottas that were reconstructed in our lab and then scanned. So in this virtual reconstruction, the location of the object is partly arbitrary. For now, they have been placed on the highest flat surface where the fragments belonging to this object has been found. The main objective of this animation is actually not study or scientific illustration, but just outreach. This virtual reconstruction will certainly enable the general public to understand Deposit 1, Deposit 2 more easily and effectively than would a real visit to the site, which is, well, a little demanding to access, I admit, and not very eloquent in itself. Both the location and kind of material of Deposit 2 suggest that the site was a small rural mountain sanctuary designed to protect an agro-pastoral economy. Given the current state of research, it is not possible to determine the precise identity of its visitors. It was perhaps frequented by the users of what appears to be the remains of an LM3C protogeometry cultivation terraces that we uncovered a few hundred meters to the northeast of Deposit 2, or the resident of a small site located nearby during the survey. In any case, the existence of Deposit 2 clearly illustrates the innovative and dynamic character of the late Minoan 3C period. Its material combines ancient cult motifs and symbols in new ways, but it is also remarkable that this votive deposit was established in a location that was not previously used, even though the people settled at Anavlochos could not have been unaware of the existence of a small middle Minoan 2B peak sanctuary established on the top of the peak of Vigla. So this peak is not only the easternmost and highest peak of the massif, it is also the one that gives Anavlochos its distinctive character and makes it identifiable in the landscape from all the hilltop settlements occupied between the late Bronze Age and Archaic period throughout the Mirabello regions. And this is actually why the reason why we used it as a logo. Votive material was also still visible on the surface at Vigla in 2014, when the rescue excavations were carried out by the Ephorate of Lathiti, and I had the chance to actually take part in this excavation and study the pottery. Finally, an LM3C settlement was located immediately, as you can see, below the peak. So we can therefore deduce that the Vigla site was deliberately avoided. Determining the reason for this avoidance remains a speculative exercise. However, since both the Minoan sanctuary at Vigla and the LM3C site of Deposit 2 share similar physical characteristics, both are mountain peaks with rocky cavities, we can assume that it was a symbolic rather than a practical motivation that led to the establishment of Deposit 2. Vigla may have been avoided because it was associated with the palatial cult. It is possible that the Cretan communities, who generally abandoned palatial coastal settlements at the end of 3B, of late Minoan 3B, also rejected the cult sites formerly administered by the palaces. Given both its location and its material, Deposit 2 could thus be seen as a cultic expression of the newly formed communities established in Crete in the aftermath of the collapse of the palatial system. Based on the material found there, the use of Deposit 2 does not seem to extend beyond the late Minoan 3C period. From the protogeometric period onwards, a new type of votive offerings was deposited in a place located 150 meters to the west of Deposit 2 that we actually started to excavate before Deposit 2 and therefore labeled Deposit 1. There, we collected some small eroded fragments of terracottas during the survey, and we excavated the place in 2017 and 2018. Physically, the site, once excavated, as you can see here, consists of an approximately 15-meter long outcrop of bedrock, which slopes gently down to a natural terrace where no activities, evidence for any kind of activities were evidenced during the excavations. The material recovered includes 1,283 fragments of votive figurines and plaques in terracotta that were recovered from very deep and narrow natural cavities in the bedrock, in which a pocket of soils had gradually accumulated. The dots on this orthophoto indicate the fine places of the fragments that were geo-referenced during excavations. So most of the material, as you can see, come from the deposit itself that I colored here in green. And below and around it, we also found eroded fragments, obviously dispersed or eroded away from the deposit itself. This assemblage, the assemblage from Deposit 1, which I currently study, is remarkable for containing almost exclusively terracottas depicting female figures, the reason why we call them the ladies of Anavlochos. They range in date from the protogeometric through the classical period, but the bulk of the deposit is made up of terracotta from the early archaic and classical periods. Except for a few early ones that you see here, which are modeled, all of them are actually mold-made. Many of them are good example of the so-called Daedalic style of the 7th century. But the most frequently represented type is this seated Gaignerot-Driessen female figure, which dates back to the classical period. The study of the fragments and complete figurines allowed the identification of at least 2 generations of molds and several subtypes. And you see here a photo showing the complete ones together with type 16, which represent a med with a R, also from the classical period. A limited quantity of geometric through classical pottery, currently under study by Grace Ernie, was also recovered from Deposit 1. The most represented forms are cups, while leads or votive shields are well attested between the late geometric and early archaic periods. Fragments of miniature vases, kernoi, and lecanis with protomies have also been identified. The very fragmentary and fragmented state of preservation of the pottery suggests a ritual breakage of the vessels. Frankly, identifying, excavating, and studying Deposit 1 and its material has been a source of fascination and joy. of terrible frustration as well, not to be able, despite our effort, to document, represent, and understand properly this context and its material. During the excavation, we rapidly realized that traditional methods of graphic documentation were unsatisfactory for this context. Photos, videos, and drawings did little to account for the site, the topography, the archaeological context, the taphonomy, and the material. In 2018, during the excavation, the first attempts at 3D modeling was made for the so-called siltstone cavity, which is a little bit more spacious than the others, and in which an exceptional anomalous assemblage within Deposit 1 had been brought to light, including a minor and prismatic seal, hence its name, the siltstone cavity. So Lucille Cocher and Anthony Chalet, then intern topographers, took multiple georeference shots in this cavity with a camera and made this model. But the microtopography of the bedrock, with its very cramped cavities, the lack of time and technical resources did not allow us to document the rest of the deposit by photogrammetry during excavations. Frustration is a good driver for research and innovation. Brieuc joined the team in 2019 and Sabine in 2022. They climbed together to Deposit 1, and Sabine 3D scanned the outcrop of bedrock and its environment by laser grammetry and by photogrammetry for the microtopography of the bedrock. These videos shows the model Sabine produced of Deposit 1, and you see that she has inserted all the geo-referenced fragments from Deposit 1 in her model that are materialized here by blue dots on this animation. You see them between the crevices. But in parallel, in the lab, we moved from, the traditional qualitative study to 3D scanning for a large selection of the fragments of terracotta in order to improve their documentation, archiving, study, and dissemination. And this allowed Sabine to replace the blue dots in her initial model by the actual 3D models of the actual fragments in the central cavity of the outcrop of bedrock. And this is what we're going to see now on this video, which is restricted to the central cavity. So the position of the fragments in the central cavity is accurate, but their specific orientation is generally arbitrary, as it was rarely possible to identify and take photographs of the fragments in situ while digging in these very deep and narrow cavities. So again, the purpose of this video is to present and make this archaeological context accessible to a general public. We are now working on a protocol of data extraction from the 3D models of the terracottas in order to automatically document these artifacts and help characterizing their processes of production, deposition, and fragmentation, which of course represent some of my main research questions. In particular, the use of 3D technologies could potentially help us to define a pattern of fragmentation based on the location and physiognomy of the breakages. The next stage involves an experimental archaeology program. The idea is to use the 3D models to 3D print some of these figurines in order to create clay molds and produce replicas that could be either broken or deposited in a geological context similar to Deposit 1. The 3D analysis of the breaks of the replicas compared with the patterns identified on the originals could potentially allow us to conclude whether the figurines were accidentally broken by natural post-depositional processes or intentionally by anthropic action at the time of their deposition or redeposition. To answer these research questions, I also initially wanted to create a GIS of the fragments and produce distribution map according to their kind of breakage, kind of fragments, chronology, iconographic type, mold, fabric. But a two-dimensional GIS would not have been totally satisfactory to illustrate and explore taphonomy. Séverine joined the team last summer, and by integrating and combining the information derived from the choroplastic study, the topographical data and the model of Deposit 1, she started building up a 3D GIS. It is still at an early stage, but I would like to show you some videos and maps that Séverine sent me some days ago. So let's fly to deposit 1, indicated by a red dot. We're approaching the Mirabello Valley, Anavlochos, and this is, we're flying over deposit 1 now. So now the red dots materialize the fragments dated to the geometric period, orange the early archaic, yellow the archaic one, in green the late archaic, and in blue the classical period. And now we can navigate in the cavities of deposit 1 and visualize the depth of the fragments according here to their chronology. I also would like to show you some of the first distribution maps, starting with the ones representing the distribution of the fragments according to their period of production. If we compare the distribution of the fragments dated to the geometric, early archaic, and classical period, we realize that the deposit was used continuously with no clear location preference by period. Another phenomenon is observable regardless the period. Most of the fragments were recovered from the cavities, while a few of them came from the terrace below, which suggests that they were simply fallen from the deposit. However, if we look at the quantity of votive deposited by period, clear peaks are observable, and the graphs will come. I have no time for this lecture. One during the early archaic and one during the classical period, most likely attesting an increase in frequentation and votive activities. Interestingly, the archaic period, which follows the abandonment of the settlement and the necropolis of Anavlochos, and the consolidation of the urban centers of the nearby cities of Druros and Milatos, is poorly represented. It is, of course, tempting to connect this shift in religious practices to the process of polis formation, but this explanation has to be further explored and evidenced. Well, now, of course, two-dimensional GIS would have been enough to reach these conclusions and offer a graphic representation of the data. What a 3D GIS adds to this is the ability to visualize and represent deposit 1 and its material in sections. So let's now focus on the central and main cavity that was the most densely packed with terracotta fragments. This time on the video, the colors were indicative first of the types of figurines and then the chronology. So the distribution by types seems to indicate that the figurines were deposited in the most suitable cavity regardless of their type, but also that sometimes, like the classical ones, were deposited in groups of figurines. Let me see here. This first impression, of course, has to be confirmed with further study at the scale of the entire deposit and not only the section of the main central cavity. This second image represents the same section of the central cavity with colors being indicative this time of the period of production of the fragments. The distribution according to chronology is pretty instructive. The depth of the fragments is not strictly correlated to their period of production. Some classical fragments in blue were located lower than some early archaic fragments. This may indicate that the potteries of the classical period did not only deposit their votive offerings, but buried them by digging into the earlier levels of deposition. Another possibility is that the fragments were moved away from their original location, either by natural processes of post-deposition or by anthropic action of redeposition. And this brings us back to the question we have already asked about the process of fragmentation of the terracottas, either accidental or intentional. The GIS allows us to address this question by examining the distribution of different fragments belonging to a same object. They're usually located very close to each other. But in some cases, the fragments are more than 1 meter apart. And this is the case precisely for this example selected on this map. Fragments of the same object, which convenience, we have given a feminine first name, often of a famous archaeologist, female archaeologist, are indicated by a dot of the same color and linked by a line of the same color on this map. So Séverine has also modeled the theoretical hydrographic network represented by white curves on this map to consider the possibility for the joining fragments to have been naturally drifted. So let's review some of this example. The two fragments composing Marilena with a classical figurine belonging to the Gaignerot-Driessen type and also a discrete tribute to our beloved site architect within the audience tonight, are indeed located along the same hydrographic line. The same can be said for the 5 fragments belonging to Séverine, with an example of the classical type of a med with a hair. The 3 fragments of these early archaic pairs of Ariane, the fragment of Louise, one of the early archaic ladies with a polosh, the 2 fragments composing the early archaic sphinx we called Nelly. So we're still at the beginning, of course, of this research. I mean, I received the material like 2 days ago, literally, and I had to work on it and every chef. But so far, it seems that the fragments belonging to a same objects are generally located within a network of communicating hydrographic lines. So that would be a natural phenomenon, moving them away apart. The terracottas from Deposit 1 find clear comparanda at many other Cretan sanctuaries. They are either of a similar type or obviously made from the same molds. In any case, examination of the core plastic material in Deposit 1 shows that between the early archaic and classical period, Anavlochos was included in a regional network of core practices and of core plastic production and circulation. Deposit 1 thus differs from Deposit 2 in terms of location, material, and modalities of deposition. While the late Monument 3C zoomorphic figures of Deposit 2 were displayed in natural niches in the bedrock and thus remain visible, the protogeometric to classical terracotta female figure of Deposit 1 were inserted or perhaps buried into the narrow and deep crevices of the bedrock. Deposit 1 thus reflects new core practices which chronologically correspond to a remarkable shift in the settlements. The remains of a small settlement site observed on the surface during the survey reflect a pattern of occupation scattered along the ridge in LM3C, and these sites appear to have been abandoned at the end of the period. A nucleated settlement then developed in the upper part of the Central Valley, where material from the protogeometric period was observed on the surface during the survey. Unfortunately, we don't have any architectural remains of this protogeometric settlement, as the Central Valley was completely restructured during the late geometric period. Megalithic retaining walls were then built on the slopes, creating large terraces on which buildings were erected. The severe erosion affecting the slopes caused most of the building to disappear, but in a high and relatively well-preserved area, a complete and distinct district was uncovered consisting of large residence, an architecturally related bench building, and a forge with its associated dump, the reason, of course, for its label, the Quartier de la Forge. The remains of another residence, whose terrace wall had been already reported by Deman, so that's why we called it Deman's terrace, have also been excavated. Also, although this residence occupies a particularly imposing visible and accessible terrace within the settlement, its organization, internal equipment, and material do not really distinguish it from the other residential buildings that have been excavated within the settlement. In fact, the search for communal or public building or space in the urban center of the Central Valley has been so far unsuccessful. By contrast, clear evidence for important gatherings of people and communal meals come from Cacoplai. The slope below the cult building that we uncovered in 2017, 2018 yielded an extremely large quantity, that is more than 40 crates of late geometric early archaic fragments of pottery, mostly belonging to drinking, pouring, serving, and cooking vessels. The piling up of this fragmentary material may indicate that it formed the filling of a terrace installed below the cult building in the classical period. Severe erosion on this steep slope would have left only the ceramic sherds and limestone rubble, respectively corresponding to the collapse of the retaining wall and terrace field. Further field work would, of course, leads us to revise this impression, but in the current state of research, the only indications of potentially communal practices at Anavlochos come from the Cacoplai sanctuary. They are therefore associated with an extra-urban and religious context rather than an urban and political one. As seen previously, parallels for the terracottas in Deposit 1 exist in other Cretan sanctuaries. But figurines and plaques from the same molds have also been found at Cacoplai. You see in color the one from Deposit 1, and in black and white the one from the Mount Archive preserved at the French Rouen. And you see that we have exactly the material produced by obviously the same molds. In addition, during the survey, sections of a potential ancient path leading from Cacoplai to the summit were identified. So the quantity and type of material recovered at Deposit 1, as well as the location and topography of the place, suggests that Deposit 1 may have been the point of arrival of a sacred road or path which passed Cacoplai. But in contrast with the material from Deposit 1, where female figures are almost exclusively represented, at Cacoplai, male and zoomorphic figurines are also attested. This suggests that although Deposit 1 and the sanctuary at Cacoplai may in some way have been connected, their respective and specific functions seem to have been different. The more specific nature of the material recovered at Deposit 1, but also its more demanding access, suggests that Deposit 1 was a more exclusive cult space, reserved maybe for a certain group of visitors, possibly for initiation rituals, while Cacoplai welcomed a wider public, the Anavlochos community, until the settlement was abandoned, and perhaps several communities after the abandonment of the settlement. The location of Cacoplai, the sanctuary of Cacoplai, also calls for comments. It lies exactly halfway between the settlement in the Central Valley and the necropolis located at the foot of the slopes. The sanctuary is only visible from the necropolis and not from the settlement. This necropolis has notably yielded the remains of at least 7 tumuli containing the pyres and burials of deceased from the community established at Anavlochos. While the appearance of the protogeometric residential occupation of the Central Valley remains a bit elusive, let's say, to us, and can only be deduced actually from the surface material observed during the survey, the existence of the protogeometric community is clearly attested by its funerary remains. The oldest tumuli date back to the protogeometric period, and it is also when the cult building at Cacoplai was erected and when the first votive terracottas were offered at Deposit 1. From Cacoplai, one could see the monumental tumuli and watch the impressive spectacle of the smoking pyres in the necropolis. It will obviously be very difficult to establish this with certainty, but recognizing the Cacoplai cult building as a mortuary chapel or associating it with an ancestral or chthonic cult, at least in the protogeometric period, is a possibility. A similar cult orientation may have existed in other sanctuaries located in the region that were also established near burials dated between the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. The location of Cacoplai should also be considered at a micro-regional scale. The sanctuary lies roughly halfway between the urban centers of two archaic cities, Trioros and Milatos. It may have served as a border or convergence point between the two civic communities of Duros and Milatos. And interestingly, figurines of seated crotrophos from the cell mold, or very similar, were recovered, similar to the one from Deposit 1 in Kakoplai, were also found in both Duros and Milatos. Topographically, however, both the arc-shaped settlement of Anavlochos and the sanctuary of Kakoplai are clearly oriented towards the Bay of Milatos, which was the most obvious maritime outlet for Anavlochos. So topographical and archaeological evidence suggests that Anavlochos may have been the first urban center of the emerging civic community of Milatos. However, this community would not have been politically formed until the middle of the 7th century, after the abandonment of Anavlochos, and at the time an urban center developed at the site of Milatos, which still had to be excavated, by the way. In the end, it was following this phenomenon of katoikism, or migration towards the sea, also well attested in other regions, of course, of the Greek world, that the conditions were met for the community to organize itself into a civic body and for the police to appear at Milatos and Duros. The cult places of Anavlochos allow us to follow the social and political evolution of a Cretan community in perpetual formation and transformation between the late Minor and 3C and the classical period. Deposit 2 illustrates the cultic practices of the small creative agro-pastoral communities, establishing, inventing new places and socio-political organization in the late Minor and 3C period. In terms of worship, this involved deconstructing palatial markers, such as the Minor and Peak sanctuaries of Bigla, to establish new ones like Deposit 2, freed from the old political order. The coalescence in the protogeometric period of the small communities formed at the end of the late Bronze Age not only implied the nucleation or synecism of the settlement, it also involved the construction of a new sacred landscape through the creation of new interconnected cult places, Kakoplai and Deposit 1, and the introduction of cult practices associated with new and specific votive material. Kakoplai and Deposit 1 had distinct functions, but both served as arenas for social interaction in a way that was probably integrative for one and segregative for the other. In this sense, they were both places where community was forged. It's not surprising that Deposit 1 and Kakoplai remained frequented after the abandonment of the Anavlochos settlement and necropolis. They not only served as places where the community was formed, they also considered it markers of the sacred landscape that the phenomenon of abandonment of the settlement and probable migration toward the sea did not abolish. On the contrary, based on the material recovered, it seems that from the classical period onwards, the use of these two places even extended to other communities, and that the sacred landscape of Anavlochos, which was also a place of memory, became institutionalized to some extent. Finally, I'd like to emphasize the obvious and major contribution that digital 3D technologies and GIS-based methodologies can make to our effort to reconstructing the sacred landscape of Anavlochos, not only in terms of documentation, archiving, mediation, but also in addressing research questions such as processes of production, deposition, and fragmentation of the votive material. Finally, I would like to warmly thank the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports and our Ephorate of Latiti for allowing us to work at Anavlochos, the French School at Athens for sponsoring the project, all the university research institutes and private foundations that generously supported the project with research grants, awards, and prizes, and of course the international and multidisciplinary team behind the fieldwork and study I presented tonight. So I cannot mention everybody, but many of them are some of them are in the audience, and I'm very grateful to them, to Valia, for instance. I also would like to particularly thank Romain Machavoine and Pierre Bolin, who managed the small teams that excavated Deposit 1, which was not an easy task, as you can imagine. And if we still have some minutes, okay? I would like us to watch together this video edited by Brieuc, which will give us the chance to fly over Anavlochos and see in context all the places we recently excavated on the massif. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Florence. That was really interesting and fascinating. Usually, Bill Kennedy directs the conversation. Now I have to do it. You have to bear with me. So if you have any questions. Okay, Tom.
Okay.
Would you like to use the microphone for the recording?
So I should stay here.
There you go. So, I mean, I'm thinking of the, is that,
It's up.
it's on,
It's on.
okay. So, it's a fascinating combination of sites, really. I mean, tremendous. I mean, the idea of, funerary settlement and religious landscapes. So if you go move away from your sites, how often do we find these extra urban 3C and then these archaic classical sanctuaries, at least in East Crete, where we have known sites? It seems odd to me. I mean, normally we have these intra-urban contexts, but your perspective is completely the opposite.
I think it's just a matter of recalling information. We've been surveying the old massif. I'm pretty sure that we just need to investigate more, and I don't see why this should be unique. I don't see obvious parallels for this situation, or I would see, or if you like, or otherwise we would have like Katoshimi and with the succession at the same place. But I mean, that kind of using a gigantic playground for ritual activities, it's pretty unique, not in reality, but probably in the archaeological record. So I think it's just a default of investigation, honestly.
But it is somewhat unique in what we find so far. But it's, like you say, it's an accident. I mean, it's not an accident. This is the way, yeah. They just haven't been found.
Yeah, I this is my assumption. Yeah. Which shows clearly that before digging or whatever, we really want to survey at a large scale, micro region or unit.
Thank you, Florence. I have a question before posing a question. The settlement is abandoned, you said, in the mid-7th century.
Probably. I mean, we still have to study in detail the pottery from the settlement. But let's say that from what was diagnostic during the excavation, I never saw anything, later than the mid-7th century and early, actually, 7th century, to be honest.
So in the beginning, you have sanctuary sites which are associated with the settlement, and we would call them sub-urban, not extra-urban, and then they become extra-urban. In a sense, because you have an abandonment.
Yeah.
This is for terminology, I think, and to understand that we pass perhaps to what you said in a kind of lieu de mémoire or whatever.
Yeah.
But the other thing that puzzles me a bit is the actual nature of these deposits. I presume this is also your questioning. Where is the focus of these sanctuaries? I mean, or places. I mean, from what I saw, I would be more. I would suggest more that this is a process of erosion coming from some place else, not a distinctive placing within the cavities. Because my question is, how can we know how the Earth was on the summit of the ridge in these years?
Yeah.
Because there's been so many centuries of erosion and erosion.
No, but still, I mean,
something is missing.
If you see the way, when we were digging it was pretty clear that some cavities had been really packed with the material. I mean, it was really, really, really packed and not easy, if you like, it would not have been easy for the fragments to get out of some very tiny cavities. It's hard to explain. I mean, when you excavate the place, you understand that some of them were grouped by types. More exactly, the cavities were mixing. The material was mixed in each cavities, but clearly, we could see that 3 or 4 croatrophoid classical figurines would have been deposited together, and 2 with a little heart. I mean, you could see a pattern, you could see something, and yes, clearly, post-depositional processes have affected the way the fragments were recovered during the excavations. But I think that the complete ones are too big to have been, moving away from the original location and not that far, and sort of locked in the small cavities. So I'm really very confident in the fact that this outcrop of bedrock has been selected for this natural microtopography and which is something really typical for Crete, honestly. I mean, we have many examples of this. I won't use the term peak sanctuaries, because we see, when we say peak sanctuaries, we think of Minoan sanctuaries, and this is not Minoan here. But I mean, clearly they were interested in using the bedrock cavities. This is something you find on top of mountain, but also near the seaside, for instance. We have many examples of this. Yeah.
Sorry, just one note.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the sanctuary at La Thurisa that we were excavating
Yeah.
years, and where we have a round building, and then it is set upon a similar setting of cavities, and then within these cavities there are a lot of material which was inside, but also this material had spread all over around. So that's why I thought that perhaps there is a focus someplace. That certainly they use the cavities intentionally at some places. I think it's natural to assume that this is the case.
Well, if you look at the distribution, it is pretty clear that the focus is the outcrop of bedrock itself. Here, this, and then on this flat terrace, you have like some eroded small fragments. Clearly, I mean, I think clearly fallen from the deposit from the. But this, I think, is the focus of interest for the votaries. Yeah, but what I don't understand actually is the location. Like, there is nothing really typical for the visibility of view. There is nothing typical like a big rock or whatever. We don't see any evidence for a spring or something like that. So the location remains pretty enigmatic so far. Yeah. It's remote, but not that far from the settlement. But then maybe just because you have this situation where you have this, with this peculiar outcrop of bedrock, I think they really they liked this. They weren't interested by this natural formation. Honestly, I think it was attracting. And then the flat area below the outcrop was probably suitable for them to gather, for the votaries, whoever they were, maybe groups of women. It's difficult to say. But what's surprising is that we did not find anything on the flat terrace, except for some small eroded fragments. I was expecting to find evidence for temporary occupation, like some pottery, some art or something. Nothing at all. No.
Thank you. It's truly amazing. So apparently you have two hill-crest sanctuaries. As far as I remember, there are some single sites, Minoan sites, usually categorized as peak sanctuaries, but which are actually placed on the crest.
Yeah. Right.
Area.
Yeah.
So two questions. The first is this dispersed settlement pattern of the late Minoan 3C period, which is quite peculiar, if I'm not mistaken. Have you got an explanation for this? Yeah.
I don't find it really peculiar, honestly. If you look at the scale of the Mirabello region, this is a pretty regular pattern for the region in 3C. You have like these small 3C sites there. Of course, the problem is that Christophe surveyed Crete for this. He mentioned he gathered many information on many of these sites, but many other sites are not mentioned at all. And I walked the area a long time ago now, and they're everywhere. These small sites, they're everywhere. Small sites everywhere, and the Anavlochos situation is very similar to what you see at Carfi, for instance. Carfi should not be understood as just a peak. Carfi should be considered together with Papura, for instance. It's a wall. You need to look at the mountainous ridge actually, and not just one peak. You see, it's a myopic vision actually, and the thing is that when you walk these bridges, you see that these small sites are dispersed everywhere. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Yeah.
But still, so in the case of Carfi, there is the central part, the one excavated by Pendelberg, which is much larger than the rest.
Well, we don't know. We actually don't know. Look at what they are digging now. I mean, they're everywhere. I think it's an artifact of excavation and publication that we have here. Honestly, I think that Carfi is pretty. It's very close, by the way. It's pretty similar to the Anavlochos situation, honestly.
So the other question, while surveying, did you find any traces of habitation contemporary to the peak sanctuary, to the Minoan sanctuary?
No, absolutely not. But no, absolutely not. But we did not. We were not allowed to survey the easternmost part of the massif for some reasons. But I mean, I've been working there. I know there is no. But to be honest, I think it started in 3A2, 3B. Okay, yeah. But it's not published. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, in that case, we should thank you once more.
Thank you very much for coming.